The alien princess's baby wouldn't stop crying. Then a human picked him up. The sound had been going on for 11 hours. Not a cry. Not exactly. It was something lower than that, something that lived in your back teeth and pulled at the bones behind your eyes. The environmental filters on Deck 9 had started stuttering around hour 3. By hour 7, the Keth ambassador had filed 2 formal complaints through official Concord channels, and the ship's medic had handed out so many headache patches that she ran out and had to replicate more. I was sitting on the floor of the corridor outside the royal quarters, back against the wall, eating a flatbread that had gone cold an hour ago, wondering how I had ended up here. My name is Nora Calloway. I am a staff sergeant in the Human Concord Liaison Corps, assigned to the diplomatic vessel known as the GCU Eternal Meridian. My job, on paper, involved scheduling, logistics, and making sure that no one accidentally served the Duran delegates something that was still technically alive. It did not involve any of this. The Eternal Meridian was carrying 14 different delegations to a summit in the outer systems, a summit that had taken 6 years of careful negotiation to arrange. Among those delegations was Princess Valeth of the Sirathi, a species so ancient that they had been charting stars before humans had figured out fire. The Sirathi were crystalline in structure, 6-limbed, precise, and deeply proud. They found most younger species irritating. They found humans especially irritating. What nobody had anticipated was that Princess Valeth would go into early labor 2 days into the voyage. The ship's medical team had handled the birth without incident. The Sirathi physiology was well documented enough that the AI-assisted delivery went smoothly. The baby arrived small and translucent and perfect, his crystalline skin already catching the light like a prism. And then he started crying, and he did not stop. The Sirathi attendants had tried everything. I knew this because Sarath, the royal chamberlain, had come to the corridor door 4 separate times over the past 11 hours, looking progressively more pale. Pale for a Sirathi meant their internal crystals lost their color. It was the equivalent of watching someone go gray in front of you. I had learned to read Sirathi emotional shifts during my 8 months aboard this ship. It was something I did out of necessity, since most of them refused to talk to me directly. I had cataloged their color shifts in a notebook. Blue-white meant calm, deep violet meant anger, gold meant something close to joy, pale, washed out, milky, that meant fear. Sarath's crystals, when he appeared in the doorway for the 5th time, were the color of old chalk. He did not speak. He looked at the door. He looked at me. He looked back at the door. His 4 eyes moved in that subtle, synchronized way that meant he was thinking very hard and hating every conclusion he was arriving at. I finished the last bite of my flatbread. I stood up. "How long since he fed?" I asked. Sarath blinked, all 4 eyes at once. "He refuses the resonance feed. Has anyone tried holding him differently?" There was a long silence. In that silence I could hear the baby, muffled through the door, and I could feel the sound in my sternum, like a low bell that would not stop ringing. "The princess has held him in all 16 traditional positions," Sarath said. "The senior attendant has performed the harmonic bonding ritual 3 times. We have adjusted the environmental resonance of the chamber twice. He will not settle." I looked at the door. I want to be honest about what happened next. I did not have a plan. I did not have a theory. I was a 34-year-old human woman who had a younger brother, 2 cousins with kids, and a memory of sitting in my mother's kitchen watching her sway back and forth with a screaming infant on her shoulder, while she talked about nothing in particular. Just talking, just making sound, just moving. I had that. That was everything I had. "Can I go in?" I asked. Sarath looked at me for a long time. I watched him calculate. I was human. I had no title. I was not a healer, not a diplomat, not a member of the Sarathi court or any court. I was the person who made sure the catering schedules did not conflict with the Keth ambassador's fasting cycles. But he was out of options, and he knew it, and I could see him knowing it. He stepped aside. The royal chamber was extraordinary. I had never been inside before. It was large and warm, and suffused with a faint harmonic hum that came from the walls themselves, a built-in resonance frequency that the Sirathi used the way humans used ambient light. The walls were pale gold, The floor had the faint shimmer of something crystalline embedded deep beneath its surface. Everything in the room was designed to be calming, beautiful, and deeply, profoundly alien. Princess Valith was in the center of the room. She was tall, even seated, with 6 limbs arranged in a posture that I recognized from my reading as the Sirathi position of formal endurance. She was holding the baby in 4 of her arms, close to her chest, and her crystals were cycling through colors so quickly that I could not track them. She was exhausted. She was terrified. She was doing everything in her power not to show either of those things, and the effort was written in every rigid line of her body. Her eyes found me the moment I walked through the door. They were the dark amber of deep water, and they looked at me the way someone looks at a chair that has wandered into a room on its own. The baby was screaming. Up close, the sound was even more complex than it had seemed through the wall. It had harmonics in it that I could feel in my ears and behind my eyes, and in the roof of my mouth. The tiny body that was producing it was extraordinary. Translucent skin over a faint crystalline structure, fingers that looked like they were made of pale glass, a face scrunched tight with the pure, uncomplicated fury of a creature that had arrived somewhere unexpected and had not been consulted. He opened his eyes. He looked at me. He kept crying, but he looked at me. I crossed the room slowly. I kept my hands visible, and my movements small. The attendants shifted behind me. I heard Sareth enter, and close the door. I stopped a few feet from the princess, and I performed the Sirathi gesture for requesting permission from a superior. It was a small movement, both outer hands turned palm up at the level of the chest. I had practiced it 3 weeks ago for a meeting that had been cancelled. I had not expected to use it here. Valith stared at me. Then, without a word, she extended the baby toward me. One of the attendants made a sound I had not heard before. I did not look at them. I reached out, and I took him, and I was not prepared for how warm he was. He was like picking up a smooth stone that had been sitting in full sunlight all afternoon, except he was alive and moving, and radiating heat in small pulses, and he was very much still screaming directly into my face. I held him against my chest. I adjusted my grip so his head was supported. And then, without making a conscious decision to do it, I started to sway. Left, right, left, right. A small movement, barely a shift of weight, the thing your body does when it has held enough crying infants to have learned that motion is the first language, and stillness is the wrong answer. I started talking to him. I was not talking to him in Sirathi. I did not know enough Sirathi for a conversation with an infant. I was talking in the low, unhurried, slightly ridiculous tone that humans use when they are trying to communicate calm across a gap too wide for words. "Hey," I said, hey, I know it's loud. It's a lot, right? You just got here and everything is enormous and loud and strange, and you didn't ask for any of this. I get it. I really do." I kept swaying. At the 30-second mark, something changed. The screaming did not stop, but the quality of it shifted. The desperate, relentless edge softened by a fraction. He was still crying, but his body had stopped fighting me. He was leaning into the movement. At 60 seconds, he was hiccuping between sobs. At 90 seconds, he was quiet. The silence landed on that room like something physical. I felt every person in it hold very still, as if any movement might shatter it. The baby's eyes were half open, unfocused, looking at the space somewhere between my face and the wall behind me. His breathing was slowing down. His fingers, those tiny pale glass fingers, had found the fabric of my uniform sleeve and were holding on. I looked up. Every Sirathi in the room was staring at me. Princess Valith had not moved. Her crystals had gone completely still for the first time since I had entered. They were a color I had not seen before, not in my notebook, a deep, layered amber that seemed to come from somewhere internal, like light through old glass. "What did you do?" she said. Her standard was perfect and precise. I thought about how to answer that. "I swayed," I said, "and I talked to him." Why did that work? I kept swaying slightly, just enough to maintain the rhythm. The baby's eyes had closed. "Human infants are loud and helpless for a long time after they are born," I said. "We spent a very long time figuring out how to manage that. Moving like this mimics what it felt like before he was born, when everything moved with his mother. It tells his nervous system that he is still safe. that nothing has gone wrong, that the world is still the right size. Sareth, from near the door, said quietly, "Is it a ritual?" "No," I said. "It is just physics, and a lot of practice." "How much practice?" Valeth asked. "Collectively?" "Several million years." She was quiet for a moment. Her crystals shifted, and the color that moved through them was something I would later look up and find did not have a direct translation. The closest approximation in the literature was something like considered reassessment. "Sit down, Sergeant Calloway," she said. I sat. There was a low seat near the center of the room, and I lowered myself into it carefully, not interrupting the sway, not shifting the baby's position. He made a small sound, and I held very still until he settled again. Valeth watched me do this. Her attendants watched me do this. Sareth watched me do this. And I saw him take out a small recording device and begin writing something down, which struck me as both extremely official and extremely funny, but I kept my face neutral. "The summit we are traveling to," Valeth said, "involves a vote on human expansion rights within the Concord." I knew this. It was not a secret. Yes. There are factions who argue that humans are too young, too impulsive, too guided by instinct rather than reason. I looked at her. They are not entirely wrong. Something moved across her face that I thought might be the beginning of a smile. It was hard to be sure. Sarathi facial expressions were subtle in ways I was still learning. "No," she said. "They are not entirely wrong, but they are wrong about what that means." She looked at her son. He was fully asleep now, one small fist curled against my collar. "I have performed every ritual my people have developed over 4 billion years of civilization," she said. "My attendants are among the most skilled in the Sirathi court. And none of us could reach him." She paused. "You walked in from the corridor, and you reached him in 90 seconds, with movement and nonsense words." "It wasn't wisdom," I said. "It was desperation. Humans spend most of their history being outmatched and under-equipped. We became very good at figuring out what worked, and holding on to it." "Yes," she said. "That is what frightens other species about you." I did not answer that, because I thought she was right, and I did not have anything useful to add to it. The baby shifted in his sleep. His grip on my sleeve tightened for a moment, and then relaxed. He made a sound that was barely audible, a small, contented harmonic that I felt more in my chest than heard with my ears. His crystals, which had been agitated and pale during the crying, were now a soft, steady amber. "His name is Sorath Vel," Valeth said. "In our language, it means the one who arrives early and makes his own rules." I looked down at him. That is the most human name I have ever heard from someone who is not human. She made the sound I had thought might be a smile. This time I was more sure. "Perhaps there is something to that," she said. Sareth wrote something else down. I stayed in that room for another 20 minutes. I did not speak much. Valeth did not speak much. The attendants stood at the edges of the room in a silence that had changed texture, shifted from shock into something quieter and more careful. When the baby stirred again, I adjusted the sway, and he settled without waking. When his grip finally relaxed fully, and his breathing was deep and even, I stood up slowly and carried him to his mother. I placed him in her arms and watched her shift to hold him the way I had been holding him, not in the formal 16-position Sirathi style, but in the simple, close, slightly crooked human way, one arm across the back, one hand under the head. He stayed asleep. I performed the permission gesture again, inverted this time, which meant something close to thank you and goodbye, and I walked out of the room. Sareth followed me into the corridor. "Sergeant Calloway," he said. I stopped and looked at him. "I am entering a formal notation into the diplomatic record," he said. "That human kinesthetic instinct was instrumental in resolving a critical situation aboard this vessel." He paused. "I want you to know that this notation will be seen by the Summit Committee." "You don't have to do that," I said. "I am aware," he said, and went back inside. I sat back down on the floor. I picked up my flatbread. It was cold and slightly stale, and I ate it anyway because I was hungry and because the corridor was finally, completely, beautifully silent. The summit happened 3 days later. I was not in the room. I was in the logistics bay, reviewing meal schedules for the return journey, and making sure that the Duran delegation's dietary restrictions had been properly flagged in the system. I heard the result through a colleague, a man named Gary Osei, who came to find me with his eyebrows doing something complicated. "The vote passed," he said. "Which vote?" "Human expansion rights, the full package." He sat down on the edge of a crate. "Gary, something happened in that room. One of the faction leaders pushed back hard, said we were too instinct-driven, too young, too unpredictable to be trusted with expanded Concord access. And then Princess Valith, who was not scheduled to speak in that part of the session, she literally just stood up uninvited. She told a story about a crying baby and a human sergeant and 90 seconds of swaying. He looked at me. The whole room went quiet, and then they voted. I did not say anything. "Was that you?" Gary asked. "I was in the corridor," I said. "I heard the baby." He looked at me for a long moment. "Sure," he said, and left. I went back to my meal schedules. Later that evening I found out that Sorath Vel's birth record had been updated in the Sirathi Historical Archive, with a footnote about human vestibular instinct and its applications in infant care. Sirath had apparently submitted a formal paper. He had cited me by name, rank, and species. I thought about my mother in her kitchen. I thought about the way she moved without thinking, weight shifting left to right, voice going low and steady, the particular nonsense words she used that meant nothing and communicated everything. She had learned it from her mother. Her mother had learned it from someone before her. It was not written down anywhere important. It had never been submitted to any archive. It was just something humans did, had always done, passed hand to hand down through every generation that had ever had a child who would not stop crying. 4 billion years of Sirathi civilization, 40 years of humans in the Concord. And it turned out that some things do not care how old you are. Some things are just true. Warmth works. Motion works. A low voice in the dark works. Being present and not leaving works. Humans had not invented these things. We had just survived long enough, in difficult enough conditions, to hold on to them very tightly. I finished my flatbread. The ship was quiet. Somewhere on deck 3, in a room full of soft gold light, an alien prince was sleeping in his mother's arms, held in a way nobody in his civilization had ever held an infant before, and it was working. Some things just translate. Gary found me one more time before we reached port. He had that same complicated look on his face, the one that meant he was trying to figure out how to frame something. "Sirath asked about you," he said. "Whether you were going to be assigned to the next Sirathi diplomatic exchange." I looked up from my work. Why would Sarath care about that? "Apparently Princess Valith requested you by name for the next summit cycle," Gary said. "Full assignment. She submitted it through official Concord channels this morning." He paused. "She listed your qualifications as, and I am reading this directly off the request form, exceptional cross-species instinct, demonstrated calm under uncertainty, and practical knowledge of infant care." I put down my stylus. "She also," Gary continued, with a look on his face that was trying very hard not to become a grin, included a supplemental note that said humans should not be underestimated based on the age of their civilization, because age measures duration, not depth. I did not say anything for a moment. Outside the viewport, the stars moved past at the steady pace of a ship in transit, ancient light crossing enormous distances to reach us, carrying no message, asking nothing, just arriving because that is what light does. "Tell them yes," I said. Gary nodded and left. I picked up my stylus and went back to the meal schedules. 3 days later, when we docked and the delegations filed off the ship into the great receiving hall of the Outer Systems Station, I saw Princess Valith pass through the corridor ahead of me. She was carrying Sorath Vel against her chest in 4 of her arms, and she was swaying, just slightly, left and right, in a rhythm that was not Sirathi, had never been Sirathi, belonged to a species that had not yet invented writing, when hers was already charting the edges of the galaxy. She did not look back at me. She did not need to. The baby was asleep.